Hello. We are so excited to show you our native speech capabilities. Welcome back to the English journey. Today, I want to share something very close to my heart, the story of how I personally broke through the prison of fear and built true confidence in speaking. My name is Anna, and I am here to share the 5 daily habits that completely changed my life.
And I am Abel. I am so glad to be here with you, Anna. Hearing that even an expert like you used to struggle with confidence is incredibly comforting. Today, we want to move past dry grammar rules and talk about the real, human side of learning a language, how to change your mindset, handle your mistakes, and practice comfortably right from your own home.
That is exactly right, Abel. And I want to begin by saying something very important before we dive into anything practical. Confidence in English is not a gift. It is not something that some people are born with and others are simply not. It is a muscle, and just like any muscle in your body, it grows slowly, through consistent, small, daily actions. I did not always believe that. For a very long time, I believed that confident speakers were just naturally different from me. I thought they had some kind of special quality that I was missing, and that belief kept me stuck for years.
I think so many of our listeners feel exactly that way, Anna. I know I have felt it myself. You look at someone speaking so naturally and fluently, and you think, I will never sound like that. There's this gap between where you are and where you want to be, and it feels so wide, so impossible to cross.
Yes, that feeling is so real, and I want to honor it today rather than brush it aside, because I think so many language teachers skip over this part. They jump straight into the techniques and the tips, but they forget to sit with the learner in that uncomfortable, vulnerable place first. So let me take you back to a moment that I have never forgotten, a moment that honestly still makes my heart beat a little faster when I think about it.
Please share it. I really want to hear this.
It was several years ago. I had been studying English seriously for about 2 years at that point. I had read countless books, I had filled notebook after notebook with vocabulary lists and grammar rules. I genuinely believed I was ready. I was invited to speak at a small community event. It was not a large audience at all, maybe 30 people sitting in a semicircle in a warm, brightly lit room. And they were all very friendly. They were smiling at me, but the moment I stood up and opened my mouth, something happened that I had never experienced before. My mind went completely blank. Not just a little blank, completely, terrifyingly empty. Every word I had ever studied seemed to simply vanish. I stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few seconds. And then I said something, I honestly cannot even remember what, and I sat down. I did not finish what I wanted to say. I just sat down.
Oh, Anna, I can feel that moment just listening to you describe it. The silence, the eyes on you, that horrible feeling of your mind just emptying out. That is one of the most frightening experiences I can imagine.
It was. And afterwards, the shame was crushing. Not because people were unkind, they were not. Most of them probably didn't even fully notice, but I noticed. I went home and I sat very quietly for a long time, and then a thought crept in, a thought that I had been trying to push away for years, and it finally arrived with full force. The thought was, you are not good enough. Your English is not good enough. You are never going to sound the way you want to sound.
That inner voice, I know that voice so well. It's so harsh and so loud, especially in moments of failure.
It is the loudest voice in the room when things go wrong. But here's what I eventually realized, and this realization became the foundation of everything that changed for me. My problem in that room was not my vocabulary. It was not my grammar. I had the words. I had studied the grammar extensively. My problem was fear. Specifically, it was the fear of judgment. I was so terrified of what those 30 people would think of me if I made a mistake, if I paused too long, if my accent was too strong, that my nervous system completely shut down. My brain interpreted the situation as a threat, and it responded accordingly. And the only way to overcome that was not to study more grammar. It was to change my relationship with fear itself. And that's where the 5 habits came in.
I love that distinction, Anna. It's not about knowing more, it's about fearing less. So let's talk about these habits. Where did you begin?
The first habit sounds so simple that many people dismiss it immediately when I describe it. And that is always a mistake, because the simplest things are often the most powerful. The first habit I called the morning self-talk ritual. Every single morning, before checking my phone, before making coffee, before doing anything else, I would give myself exactly 2 minutes to speak aloud in English, alone, in my room, or sometimes in the bathroom, just speaking. No topic was too small. I would talk about what I planned to do that day. I would say things like, today I'm going to the market and I need to buy vegetables and maybe some bread. I want to call my sister this afternoon. Tonight I will read a few pages of my book before I sleep. Very ordinary, very simple thoughts, but spoken aloud in English in my own voice.
Just 2 minutes? That seems almost too short to make a real difference.
I know it sounds small, but think about what was really happening in those 2 minutes. I was warming up my vocal cords every single morning in English, just like a singer warms up before a performance or an athlete stretches before a run. I was preparing my mouth, my tongue, my breath for English. More importantly, I was doing it in an environment with absolutely zero judgment. There was nobody to impress. There was nobody to disappoint. It was just me and the English language together in the quiet of the morning. And slowly, day after day, my brain began to associate speaking English with something calm, something private, something safe. That association changed everything.
I think the reason I love this habit so much is that it removes the pressure completely. When I try to practice English, I immediately feel this pressure to be correct, to be impressive. But if it's just me, alone, in the morning, just warming up, that pressure isn't there.
Exactly. And that absence of pressure is the entire point. You're training your nervous system to relax around the act of speaking English. You're building a new emotional memory. Over time, that calmness starts to travel with you. It begins to show up in conversations with other people because your brain has done this hundreds of times and survived it and actually enjoyed it. The habit retrains not just your mouth, but your mindset.
That's beautiful. Okay, so every morning, 2 minutes of speaking aloud, just about your day, no corrections, no pressure. What was the second habit?
The second habit I called the 5-minute audio diary, and this one took a little more courage, at least for me in the beginning. Every day, I would take out my phone and record myself speaking in English for approximately 5 minutes, just talking about my day, about something I noticed, about a feeling I had, about something that made me laugh. And then, this is the key part, I would listen back to the recording, not to criticize myself, not to count my mistakes, but simply to hear my own voice speaking English and to become comfortable with it.
Listening to my own voice is honestly one of the most uncomfortable things I can think of. Most people strongly dislike hearing themselves on a recording, right? That voice sounds so different from what you hear inside your own head.
It does feel strange, and I completely understand the discomfort. But that strangeness is precisely why the habit is so valuable. Most of us go through life never truly listening to ourselves. We hear our voice from the inside, which is always slightly different from how it sounds to others. When you listen to your recorded voice regularly, something remarkable happens. The strangeness fades, the discomfort softens. You begin to recognize your voice as your own, as something real and valid and worthy of being heard. And that familiarity becomes a form of self-acceptance. You stop spending mental energy being embarrassed by how you sound, and you start channeling that energy into what you are actually saying.
So it is not about analyzing your mistakes at all. It is purely about becoming comfortable in your own English skin.
Precisely. Of course, over time, you will naturally begin to notice certain things, patterns in your speech, words you use frequently, rhythms in your sentences, but none of that awareness should feel like self-criticism. It should feel like gentle self-discovery. You are getting to know your English self, your voice, your pace, your particular way of expressing ideas, and that self-knowledge is an enormous confidence builder.
I'm already thinking about starting this tonight. What came next, Anna?
The third habit is perhaps the most joyful of all five, and it is one that I think every single learner can make their own in a very personal way. I call it immersion through passion, and the core idea is beautifully simple. Whatever you love in your native language, find the English version of it and let that become your primary source of English input. Stop treating English like homework. Start treating it like a hobby.
Can you give some examples? Because I think some people might not know where to start with this.
Of course. Think about what genuinely excites you, what you would spend your free time doing even if there were no obligation involved. If you love cooking, find English language cooking channels or food shows and watch them purely for the joy of it, not to study. If you love cars, find English documentaries or YouTube channels about engines, racing history, or car design. If you love stories, find an audiobook or a podcast that tells stories in English. If you love nature, find wildlife documentaries in English. The subject does not matter at all. What matters is that your brain begins to associate the English language with something that brings you genuine pleasure.
Because right now, for so many learners, English is linked in their brain to stress, to exams, to grades, to red pen marks on their essays.
Exactly that. And those negative associations are silently working against you every time you try to practice. Your brain has learned, over years of schooling, that engaging with English means being evaluated, being judged, being found lacking. So it resists. It creates anxiety. But when you watch a cooking show in English because you genuinely want to learn how to make that dish, something completely different happens in your brain. Dopamine is released. You feel interested, alive, engaged, and the language that is flowing through your ears in those moments is being absorbed in a rich, natural, joyful way. You're building fluency without the heavy weight of obligation pressing down on your shoulders.
This is such a shift from how most of us were taught. We were always told to study English, but you are saying to live in English, in the areas of life that already light you up.
That is a beautiful way to put it, Abel. Live in English, in the spaces that already bring you joy. And over time, you will begin to notice that your vocabulary expands in ways that feel natural because they are connected to something meaningful to you. You're not memorizing isolated words on a flashcard. You are building associations, sound, image, emotion, meaning, all woven together in the context of something you genuinely care about.
I want to talk about the fourth habit because I have a feeling it speaks directly to one of my biggest personal struggles. I have this very bad habit whenever I'm nervous speaking English. I rush. I push all my words out as fast as possible, almost as if I want to get through the sentence before something goes wrong. And then, of course, something does go wrong, and I feel even worse.
I know that pattern intimately. Rushing is one of the most common responses to anxiety, and it's completely understandable. The nervous system wants to escape the uncomfortable situation as quickly as possible, so it speeds everything up. But in doing so, it creates the very chaos it's trying to avoid. Words get tangled, thoughts get lost. The listener struggles to follow, and the speaker's anxiety deepens. It becomes a cycle that feeds itself.
So, how did you break that cycle?
The fourth habit is what I call embracing the pause, and it begins with a single, almost radical realization. Silence is not failure. Pausing is not weakness. In fact, when used intentionally, a pause is one of the most powerful tools a confident speaker has. Think about the speakers you admire most, in any language. Have you ever noticed how they pause, how they take a slow, easy breath between thoughts, how they seem completely comfortable in the small silences?
Yes, actually. The most confident speakers I've ever listened to do pause, and somehow the pause makes them seem more authoritative, not less.
Because the pause communicates something. It communicates that this person is not afraid of silence, that this person is thinking carefully, choosing their words deliberately. It projects calm and intelligence. So I began practicing what I call the intentional breath. Whenever I felt the urge to rush, whenever anxiety started pushing my words faster and faster, I would take one slow, quiet breath, just one. In through the nose, out gently. And in that breath, two things happened. First, physiologically, my nervous system began to slow down. Deep breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the body's natural calming system. And second, practically, I bought myself thinking time. That one breath gave my brain a moment to find the next word, to organize the next thought, to move forward clearly rather than chaotically.
That is something I could practice right now, even in my daily life, before a meeting, before a phone call, before any moment where I feel that anxiety starting to rise.
Absolutely. And the beautiful thing is that the pause starts to feel natural very quickly. You stop experiencing it as a frightening gap and start experiencing it as a rhythm. Speaking becomes less like running desperately from one word to the next and more like walking at a comfortable pace through a garden, unhurried, deliberate, genuinely enjoyable.
I love that image, a garden walk instead of a desperate sprint. And you said there was a fifth habit as well, which sounds deeply important.
The fifth habit is one that I believe is the most emotionally significant of all, and yet it is the one that learners almost never think to practice. I call it the daily victory log. Every evening before I went to sleep, I would take a moment. Sometimes I would write it in a small notebook, sometimes I would simply speak it aloud to myself. And I would identify one thing I did well in English that day, just one thing. It did not need to be impressive. It did not need to be large. Maybe I understood a phrase in a conversation that I had not understood before. Maybe I remembered a word at exactly the right moment. Maybe I kept speaking even when I felt nervous, even when the words were imperfect. Whatever it was, I named it. I acknowledged it. And I said, or wrote, this was a victory.
This feels almost counterintuitive because our minds are so trained to focus on what went wrong. We replay our mistakes over and over, but we barely notice our small wins at all.
That is exactly the problem, and it is a deeply human one. The brain has what psychologists call a negativity bias. It is wired by evolution to pay much more attention to threats, errors, and failures than to successes. This was useful for our ancient ancestors who needed to remember where the danger was, but it is deeply unhelpful for a language learner who needs encouragement, momentum, and a growing sense of capability to keep going through the long and sometimes discouraging journey of building fluency.
So the daily victory log is essentially retraining your brain to notice what is working, not just what is not.
Precisely. And this is not naive positive thinking. It is not about pretending that mistakes do not happen or that there is no room to improve. Mistakes happen every single day, and growth requires acknowledging them. But there is a profound difference between noticing a mistake as information, as data that helps you improve, and dwelling on it as evidence that you are not good enough. The victory log teaches your brain to hold both things at once. Yes, today was imperfect. And also, today I did this one thing well. Both of those things are true, and the more consistently you practice focusing on the second truth, the more your confidence grows. Not because you have fewer mistakes, but because you stop letting the mistakes define you.
That shift in perspective sounds so powerful. You're not changing the reality of your practice, you're changing the lens through which you view it, and that changes how you feel about showing up to practice tomorrow.
And the day after that, and the day after that. Because confidence is not something you find one day, fully formed and waiting for you. It's something you build, brick by quiet brick, through the willingness to show up imperfectly every single day, to embrace the journey with all of its discomfort and beauty, and to trust that each small, honest step is already enough.
When you listen to you describe all 5 of these habits together, I notice something. None of them require expensive courses or perfect conditions or a native speaker sitting across from you. Every single one of them can be done completely alone at home, with nothing more than your phone and your honest commitment to showing up.
That was deeply important to me when I was developing these habits because I did not always have access to expensive resources or professional tutors or immersive environments. I was working with what I had, in the quiet of my own home, on an ordinary schedule with ordinary limitations and ordinary days. And what I discovered is that those ordinary days, stacked faithfully one on top of the other, create something extraordinary. Not because of any single dramatic breakthrough, but because of the direction. You are always moving forward, even on the days when you don't feel like it, even on the days when the words don't come easily and your confidence feels fragile and small. You are still facing the right direction, and that matters more than speed.
I think that's the message that I really needed to hear today, and I know our listeners needed it too. The direction matters more than the speed. You don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be fast, you just have to keep facing forward.
And to trust the process deeply, even when you can't yet see the results. The morning will come, and I promise it will come, when you open your mouth and the words flow a little more easily than they did before, when you pause in a conversation and feel calm instead of panicked, when you listen back to your recorded voice and hear not an embarrassing stranger, but a familiar, growing, capable person. That morning will come, and every small habit you build today is bringing it closer.
Anna, what you shared today, your story, your vulnerability, these beautiful 5 habits, it's reminded me that learning a language is one of the most courageous and deeply human things a person can do. And that courage doesn't announce itself in loud, impressive moments. It lives in the small, quiet, daily choices to keep going.
Confidence is not something you find one day, fully formed and waiting for you. It's something you build, brick by quiet brick, through the willingness to show up imperfectly every single day, to embrace the journey with all of its discomfort and beauty, and to trust that each small, honest step is already enough.